There is something about somebody like that who is so anti-Catholic that becoming Catholic is physically challenging for them to do. It's so physically, mentally, this roadblock that as you begin to dismantle those misconceptions, read the early church, read scripture with a fresh lens that isn't this anti-Catholic raging lens. Stops burning rosaries, stops burning prayer books, and gives the Catholic Church a fair chance. Man, oh man. This is the story of somebody who did those things that you're going to love. Sophia Nikolai, who was so anti-Catholic, she's doing all those kinds of things, became Catholic really by the skin of her teeth, in spite of herself. This is an amazing story, guys. I hope that it blesses you and so many more people. Please watch and enjoy. Hey friends, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you're listening on podcasts, your ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify help to push the podcast out to new listeners. So please do press pause, leave a rating and a review. That really helps the podcast big time, guys. And thank you for listening. If you're watching on YouTube, hello YouTube world. Listen, we're growing the channel, so please do subscribe to this channel, guys. Leave some comments in the videos. Like this video. Share it with friends, family, strangers, enemies, anyone you see on the street. Just share this with them so that they can hear this amazing story and expands the reach of these kind of conversations, guys. We would love you to do that, and thank you. I am joined this week, guys, by Sophia Nikolai. I should have asked you how to spell your last name, but
You did great.
I'm going to go with that. I'm not going to pronounce the town you were from, Wisconsin. That seems way too daunting. But okay. She is from Wisconsin. Lives there with her husband, Garrett. Their 7-month-old Benny, two snorty pugs.
Yes.
It's fantastic. She's a recent convert to the Catholic faith from a lifelong Evangelical Baptist anti-Catholic background. We'll get into that in a little bit. It sounds pretty fantastic. She's a registered dietitian by trade, but her true passion lies in defending the Catholic faith and being a mother. She has a YouTube channel that we'll make sure you guys get a hold of afterwards as well. Fantastic. This is great stuff. Sophia, thanks for being here. Welcome to the show, and hello.
I'm so excited to be here. Hello.
I'm thrilled to have you. I'm for many reasons, not least of all, you sent me your bio to read, which was awesome earlier in the week that I asked you to. And then this evening, I got an extra email from you that said, make sure they know how anti-Catholic I was. I was ripping up rosaries. I was burning prayer books. I'm like, okay, This is going to be a good story. So
got a little intense for a bit. Yeah,
that's awesome. So we're here for it because listen, these kind of stories are some of the most fascinating. Somebody who's seriously anti-Catholic, who kind of just got picked up by like your bootstraps and turned over and somehow became Catholic. So listen, my main job here, and listeners would love me to do this, is to get out of the way and let you tell your story. So go back as far as you want to go back, your origin story. We'll unpack it. We'll dig in along the way with more details. But where does your faith journey begin, Sophia?
Yes. So I always preface, I always try to say, I didn't want to become Catholic, but I had to become Catholic. So I prefaced this whole conversation with that fact. True. I was baptized as a baby, I think as Lutheran, in the, is it ECLA, ELCA? And that just nominally Protestant. So, we weren't super passionate about it, but it definitely, we'd pray before meals, things like that. Then let's see, my parents split when I was about 10 or 11, and my mom kind of was interested in the evangelical world. She had met some people at work who were into the evangelical realm. And so she kind of said, hey, we're going to start going to this church. So, okay. So I went, got plugged into the youth group and all of that. And, I often would say got saved or gave my life to Christ when I was about a freshman in high school, I want to say. And then from that point on, I really just on mission, on fire for Christ, which is awesome. I always say I don't regret any of my upbringing. I'm glad that I was raised in that way. However, it was some point around, I want to say freshman year. I'm trying to speed through this because it could get very long. Freshman year of college, I got plugged into Cru. Campus Crusades for Christ. I don't know if you've. I don't know if it's in Canada, but I know
it is.
It's all over America.
I was in it.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay, perfect. And then simultaneously with Cru, I was also getting plugged into some more Baptist thought, fundamentalist Baptist thought around when I was home, because somebody came into our life that was really involved with Calvary Chapel and all that sort of thing. And so it kind of was like this conglomeration of Cru was giving me this message of we have to go every day and be on mission to bring people into the truth, right? So into Protestantism, I guess I'll say. And then also I was getting exposed to this. I don't know if you're familiar with Calvary Chapel.
Yes. Yeah.
Listeners might not be, but very famously fundamentalist Baptist thought, very anti-Catholic in nature. Yep. So it was kind of this message starting to come in that was like, okay, we have to save the poor Catholics, right? Because Cru, they would kind of just make you think, Catholics didn't have the gospel. We were there to kind of clarify. And then Calvary Chapel line of thought was very anti-Catholic in nature. So you were getting bombarded with, sermons really just focused on how horrible the Catholic Church is and things of that nature. So that was when my anti-Catholicism really was in bloom, was probably freshman, sophomore year of college. So then I I was flirting a little bit with anti-Catholicism, but I wasn't fully engaged. So I would listen to I would listen to Mike Winger. I would listen to James White. I would have my coffee in the morning and put a James White debate on, and I'd be like, oh, ha, 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 this is so great. This makes so much sense. And I felt really smart because I was just absorbing James White arguments. And then, what really was the pivotal thing? Well, I guess I don't have to rush into that because we're not there yet. What the conversion part. But I would just say my process was nominal Protestant, on fire evangelical. I mean, leading worship team at church, leading Bible studies in college, all of those sort of things. Then it kind of started taking that turn towards anti-Catholicism as a subset of my faith. And then I meet my now husband. I don't know if we want to pause there.
Yeah. That's fantastic. So a lot of listeners to this show, right, have heard these kind of, or have been in these places before, right? Mm-hmm. I did a stint in Campus Crusade in university, and the mentality. I think the interesting thing there, okay, is it's not a denomination, it's not a church, it's a para kind of ministry.
Yep.
So it's drawing from all kinds of different faith backgrounds. Like when I was in a Pentecostal church. Okay. My friend was a Calvinist in a very much a fundamentalist Baptist church. The guy leading our small group was in some kind of evangelical Lutheran church. Right. We were all from different backgrounds. If we were to dig into our beliefs at, say, a Bible study, we'd realize we have quite different ideas about things, right? But which didn't seem to be a problem for us because the central message was we have to save people, and we have to save Catholics sometimes in particular, right? Mm-hmm. But the strange thing there was and my friend Rod Bennett mentioned this on a show a couple of weeks back, that, well, what are these groups like Campus Crusade, what are you saving them to? Is it the Lutheran church? Is it the Baptist church?
Yes.
Is it Pentecostal church? Because we believe different things about different ideas that are important things, right? Like you were baptized as a baby, say, in a Lutheran church. Yeah. Well, the fundamentalist Baptist would think that was insane thing to do in many contexts, right? So that itself is a kind of an interesting animal, right? To be a part of, I think.
I actually got baptized again. So which I confessed in my first confession as a Catholic, but I got baptized again because I was told your baptism as a baby didn't count and it wasn't legitimate. So you have to do this public profession of faith. And so, and I noticed that. I mean, I did start to grow a little bit discontent with denominationalism in college, just because, like you said, Cru, I think they say they're interdenominational, which
yeah.
Okay, what does that mean? That basically Protestantism, we're all trying to get to the same place. We have differences, but that doesn't really matter. And I started to just get really bothered by that. Just logically, it would always be, we agree on the essentials. But when you really talked with somebody of a different tradition, it's like, no, we don't. baptism is essential, in my opinion, and according to all of church history, and we don't agree on what it does and the functionality of it. And so I just started to become really bothered by denominationalism. So that kind of starts to shift me into, well, Catholicism.
Yeah. And the fundamentalist Baptist idea, so fundamentalist kind of anti-Catholic idea, right? Like Calvary Chapel, that kind of strand of Christianity, even in, I had a family who were in an Anabaptist church, like a Mennonite background church, right? And it wasn't overtly anti-Catholic, but what they would be talking about from the pulpit in some of these really deep Bible studies would bring up this idea of, well, there was this true group over here of Christians that even though the church got corrupted and fell away, this true group of believers over here that now we're a part of, and now that in the Reformation, we kind of, that's us, right? But they're there all along, that's us. Now we're taking back this kind of true church. And it wasn't necessarily anti-Catholic, but the message there is, well, it was the Catholics that were the wrong church and we were the right church, right? And then you get a kind of anti-Catholicism that I experienced as a Pentecostal Christian that was just in the air we breathed, right? It wasn't overt, it wasn't kind of ever really mentioned, but we knew we didn't pray rote prayers. That was we didn't believe that. We didn't have statues or even a very big cross in our church proper because the Pharisees who did rituals and wrote prayers, and those were the bad guys in the Bible,
right?
And those are the modern day Catholics, right? Would be kind of the implication, right? So you get kind of different flavors of anti-Catholicism depending where you are, but like the kind you're describing, right, is that from the pulpit, kind of pretty overtly, right, anti. So what's the drive behind that, I wonder? Is it we're not them, so we're doing okay? Or is it we got to save them because they're awful? Or like what's the drive there, I wonder?
I don't know. Because on the one hand, just from personal experience, when I was in my anti-Catholic phase, it was actually a lot of pride. And I can't speak on behalf of these groups, and say that it's pride. But I know for me, it was like, they're so lost and so corrupt. And I'm finally like pulled out of that in this true realm of Christianity. And I just want to almost brag about that. I don't know. And I do think, there's soul, like, what's the soul saving, they would say, or like they'd have counts. Like I remember at one church I went to, they would go on like missions and they would share the gospel. And then they would have tally marks on the whiteboard at the end of the day of like how many souls were saved. And so I think they are leading with that thought of we're saving as many people as we can. But like you said before, there's different flavors of anti-Catholicism. I do think it is just inherently woven into Protestantism because Protestantism, as I think a podcast you had on last week, he was talking about to protest. That's what it means. And that's in the very fabric of it. You can't really, you might not realize it and in practicality be practicing this way, but I think it automatically exists in Protestantism to be protesting the Catholic faith, the Orthodox faith. Because if you really look at it, all of Protestantism was formed on the reformers, but, challenging Catholic doctrine and then making the contrary doctrines to kind of shut down Catholicism. That just comes out in Protestant sermons and Protestant thought. You really can't get away from it. You might not realize what you're absorbing, but it is usually some level of anti-Catholicism.
Yeah, that's such a good point because it is, right? If it's founded as a protest movement, even if you've lost that kind of sense of what you're protesting against, it always is a reaction against something else, right? That's kind of the theology that you've built yourself upon, is this theology that, okay, we're on the face of it, it's sola scriptura, we're finding our theology right from the Bible, but what it really is the theology of the Bible that's not what the Catholics are doing, right? That's the origin, because like you say, especially in that kind of evangelical Protestantism, right? There's clear indications in Scripture that baptism actually saves. It does something, right? there's clear indications from Scripture that the Lord's Supper is an actual tangible thing that's really real. Like those are literally found in Scripture. They're not believed because the Catholics believe those things, right? Or because we, the strand of evangelical Christianity that we're a part of inherited this Zwinglian tradition from this one reformer who took things as symbolic, and we kind of inherit that because we are protesting against this thing down here. So you make a very good point, right? The theology at its base comes from a protest. So even if you're far removed from actually protesting, your theology is built upon a protest. Because you're Protestant, right?
Yeah, and they don't realize that, and I didn't. I didn't until I was kind of introduced to church history. But yeah, it's unfortunate.
Yeah, I like what you say too about pride. And this, I want to be delicate. This is the Cordial Catholic, and I know you are too. We obviously can't judge people's motives, but there does come a point in my patience, and I try to extend it as long as possible, where there are people like you mentioned, Michael Winger, you mentioned James White. There are great Protestant apologists. I know many of them, and that at some point you've been corrected so many times. It's been explained to you what Catholics actually believe so many times. You've heard. We've heard you here in debate what Catholics actually believe. Yet you continue to parrot these kind of straw man, like ridiculous ideas of what Catholics believe and presenting that as what we believe as Catholics and then taking that down, right?
Yep.
And I think when you talk about pride, there has to be a certain amount of pride at play there when you've been corrected, when you've heard what Catholics actually believe, but you continue to share a mischaracterization, a caricature of the Catholic faith to your audience, to your followers, to in debates. At some point, right? I think anyone has to kind of go. And I think the interesting thing is, after recent James White debates, there have been backlash amongst even some of his loyal followers to say, wait, well, you can't, really? Because there comes a point when I think that becomes an issue of the heart between these guys and God, but you gotta figure at some point you've heard this enough. If you choose to continue in ignorance when you know better, that's a pride thing, right?
It has to be, I think. I often say or think, because if I look back at my history, I almost had my mind made up. No matter what I discover, it will not be Catholicism.
Yeah.
No matter what. It almost seems like, again, not generalizing, but a lot of these apologists I was absorbing, it seems like everything they do, they approach it with that overall disposition of no matter what, we are not going to be Catholic. And you commit to that first, and then you flesh out your apologetics.
Yeah.
And so I think it's rare to find, well, at least in my experience, to find people who are genuinely open to different ideas of theology. I think it really has to be a miraculous intervention of the Lord when it comes to converting the Catholic faith.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I gotta think too, like for me, those people, as somebody who was wondering what Catholics were doing and looking at the Catholic faith and wondering, okay, these things seem like they are good points the Catholics are making. Who's going to help me debunk them, disprove Catholicism on this journey that I'm on? And when I turned to guys like you mentioned, that those arguments weren't satisfying.
Exactly.
I realized they were based on caricatures, and I realized they're based on misinformation about, I knew enough from what I've read. I thought, okay, I'm trying to stay Protestant. But the best guys they're putting up there are just parroting these arguments that aren't actually what Catholics believe, because the Catholic arguments are better, are more compelling, right?
Yeah, I think anybody with an honest conscience knows that. Might not always admit it, but I remember when I was in my conversion, in the throes of it, I would always be so unsatisfied with the Protestant angle. Genuinely, I was always like, dang it, say something else. Just make me believe you. And even when I would meet with, I would sit down with different pastors and things. I remember just the answers I would get were so seriously, that's all you have? That's all we got? And when I would watch debates, I always knew in the back of my mind the Catholic debater one. But I never wanted to admit it. So
Yes. I can remember like a fundamental moment for me was, we'll unpause your story in a minute. I'm sorry to, I don't want to take you down rabbit
great.
trails.
This is great. Yeah.
But a fundamental moment for me was watching a debate, and it was like an old, like it was super grainy, like must have been on a VHS, kind of converted to like video online in the early days of YouTube. And it was Father Mitch Pacwa versus James White on like Sola Scriptura or something.
Yep.
And it was so ridiculous. And I was like, okay, let me hear the best arguments against the idea of the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. And James White brings out these props, these great big books, these catechisms, and are dropping them on the table and like boom, 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 saying, look at all this stuff the Catholic Church has added to the Bible. This is so wrong. Like they've done this. You must believe all of this to be Catholic. Like how could they do this? And Father Mitch just kind of gets up and like it wasn't a substantive argument. It was kind of a look at all this stuff. And I was like, okay, so what's the rebuttal? And Father Pacwa gets up and kind of says, yeah, we have things we've talked about. Like that's church teaching, because since the Bible was written, things have happened. And the church has had to decide on what it believes in those things. Yeah. And that's helpful and good. And I thought, not that, right? So here's a debate where I'm hoping for, like you say, this amazing Protestant answer. Right. It fell so flat. Because, of course, in that case, the church has taught new things. It hasn't added to the Bible. It hasn't required you to believe all these mountainous things. It's authoritatively ruled on things to help Christians to understand what's right and what's wrong. I thought that made a lot of sense to me. But I was so what's the word? I was so disappointed in James White on that debate and so many others of these Protestant, debaters and apologists, because those arguments just seem like they're not very good.
Like I've heard these a lot already. Yeah. Yes, say something different than the reformers. Yes. I know. I think to be Catholic, the biggest change that I think a lot of converts experience is before you're Catholic, you see the Catholic Church, the sacraments, the spiritual life as just a bunch of obstacles to God. And then it's almost like once you really give in to the Catholic faith and you open your heart to it, you undergo this radical change of opinion of these are gifts. So it goes from like obstacles to, oh my goodness, these are the best gifts on earth. Yes. And why wouldn't we want the Eucharist? And why wouldn't we want confirmation and reconciliation? So getting ahead of myself, but I think it takes an act of the Lord and an open heart to really remove those scales from people's eyes.
I gotta tell you this. I have, in 6 years of doing this, I have not heard a better analogy than that one. From obstacles, that's fantastic, to gifts, because that's so true, right? From obstacles to gifts. I love
to like
that.
Stepping stones or something. Yes. I don't know. We should make it like a banner. But
that's very well put. That's very well put. I love that. That's okay, awesome. Let's unpause your journey. You met your husband. Have we missed the anti-Catholic Bible burning stuff yet? Because I want to make sure we get into that. Because that sounds like a lot of fun.
I know. And sometimes I struggle. I actually struggle sometimes to share my story because it was just so like there was a lot of things simultaneously happening. And so it's can't give this like perfect chronological thing. But so I met my husband. The burning of the books did not start yet. I was like, coming into meeting my husband, I'm passionately evangelical. I'm kind of anti-Catholic. It's not like in full burn yet, because I didn't have a reason to be super anti-Catholic yet in my life. Like I didn't have an actual situation to put that into practice. But then I met my now husband Garrett, and he is the first serious Catholic that I've ever experienced. We're talking, we're going on dates, and he's really starting to flesh out what he believes as a Christian. Because at first he's like, I'm a Christian. I'm like, great, we're both Christian. Well, then in my brain, I'm like, once I find out he was Catholic, I'm like, oh, we're very, very different. And so he ends up telling me that he's Catholic. He's actually genuinely passionate about it. He's practicing the faith. He's receiving all the sacraments, etc. And I'm finally, for the first time, faced with true opposition. He knew his theology. He knew how to challenge me. And so I started to dig deeper into my anti-Catholicism because I had to now prove somebody wrong, on the ground here running. I had to actually now flesh this out and, convince somebody why they're wrong. And so it kind of for a while in my head, it seemed it was me against his family. So he has 12 siblings, obviously 2 parents, and they're all very passionately Catholic.
Wow.
So I'm kind of pressing in and trying to, and all my Protestant friends are like, you have to keep praying, he'll come to the faith, he'll come home or whatever. And I'm like building up this argument to try to pull him and all of his family members into the Catholic faith, but they're not budging. They're not impressed. And so really then I start to be angry because I'm like, I'm giving my best. I am praying. I am giving the theology. I am opening up the Bible, and he is not budging. So then I almost, and I said this in another podcast, I felt at that point like I had to do dramatic things to kind of like break this curse of Catholicism, coming against me. And so I felt like, and so as I'm listening to more Mike Winger, I'm listening to more James White debates, I'm hearing all of this anti-Catholic rhetoric constantly. Then I'm starting to get angry, at what my now husband believes. I'm like, okay, this is not just wrong. This is demonic is what that was the shift.
Yeah.
That was the shift. And so once I firmly started to believe that it was evil, that it wasn't just wrong, it was evil, then I felt like I needed to start ripping up rosaries, burning his prayer books, doing those really dramatic things to kind of get it out of our life. And hopefully he would convert then. But he didn't.
Yeah, that's good for a relationship. Yeah.
Super healthy.
Burning your spouse's prayer books. And that's, wow.
Super healthy. And so it got to a dark place. And he did convert a little. He started to kind of soften and come to church services with me and things, but he was never fully impressed. You could always tell. He was always coming away with genuine concerns and questions that were, just logical questions, I think.
Yeah.
So that was that. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay. So I'm curious, like what kind of arguments were you presenting, if you can remember any of them, to this pretty well school? It sounds like it. They have many kids, Catholic family, really practicing their faith. Like, what did you think was compelling for them to hear?
I think a lot of pulling from Romans and Galatians and like the Pauline arguments. A lot of it seemed to always center around justification. I really thought I could get them there. And then just like typical thing, honestly, nothing new, like typical things, praying to the saints, this is good. This is necromancy. And just really like, again, taking the normal anti-Catholic rhetoric, not questioning it and just regurgitating it and thinking that would be profitable. And clearly it wasn't.
Yes. So. And when that fails, burn things and tear things apart.
And then just get more angry.
Get the drama. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So where did it go next from there?
Yeah. Okay. So then, I'm trying not to talk with my hands so much. So then I start to kind of get, again, prideful, angry. Those two things are happening. But then I can honestly boil it down to, I was on Instagram and somebody that I went to school with or college with had posted something, a quote of John Henry Newman, and it had said to be deep in church history is to cease being Protestant.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it was about that specific quote, but it bothered me to my core, and it bothered me for days. And I would dream about it. I kept thinking about it. I couldn't get it out of my head. And so, Google search what this quote, okay, it's a Catholic cardinal. And then from there, I say it all went downhill. Because somehow from that point on, it was, okay, now I've been exposed to this idea of church history. What does that even mean? Because as a Protestant, I was never, especially evangelical, I was never taught about church history. That's just not even a topic. So now I'm exposed to church history as a thing. And now I'm exposed to these guys called church fathers. And it's freaking me out because there seems to be all these people saying, oh yeah, once I read these guys, I became Catholic. That is a scary thing to hear when you are committed to not being Catholic.
Yeah.
So I start to kind of lightly read the church fathers. I'm reading like cherry picked quotes on Protestant blogs, right? So I'm like, okay, I'm going to read church fathers through the lens of Protestant, so it'll be okay.
Yes, I tried that.
And even that, I was like, this does not sound Protestant as I'm reading from these Protestant blogs. And then somehow I stumble upon like Catholic Answers on the internet. And then I'm on somehow churchfathers.org, which I didn't at the time know was Catholic. But now I know it's Catholic. And I'm reading these things. I'm reading these blatant quotes from Ignatius about the Eucharist and the Eucharistic sacrifice and how it's literally the blood of Christ and the flesh of Christ.
Yeah.
And I'm actually throwing up as I'm reading this. So I would have a trash can next to me. I'm not kidding. It was like when I said in the beginning that I had to be Catholic, I didn't want to be Catholic. It's because I didn't want to read these things, but I knew I had to because I had been exposed to it now a little bit. And it was like what you said earlier. I could not resolve to stay in ignorance at that point. I had to read it and I didn't want to. So I would read it and I would vomit and I would read some more and I would vomit. I wouldn't eat. It was a really life-shaking experience because at that point, my whole life had been dedicated to being an evangelical Christian, faith alone, grace alone, the 5 solas. And then also just for the past 2 years, I've been trying to convert all these Catholics. And now this would look really bad if I, became Catholic.
Yeah.
So it was like it's like looking at a car accident. Like you don't want to look, but you do when you drive past. Yeah. That's kind of like a good, and it's a weird analogy, but it's a good analogy for reading the church fathers. I couldn't stop, but I wanted to, until it came to a point I knew in the back of my head I knew it was true. But I still wasn't ready for a while. It took about a year for me to fully leap and take that step of like talking to a priest and such.
Wow, that's incredible. I can remember, like for me, it was I Googled, do evangelicals become Catholic? Because I had been looking at a few things. I'd encountered a few things. I had this Protestant pastor got me on this journey into looking at church history. And I began to look not even at the early church, but at the Reformation, first of all, and then kind of backwards from there. And I kept encountering, like you say, these Catholic kind of, points. One of the first things I encountered was this idea of the reformers at the Reformation were kind of shopping around like their version of Christianity, right? So like Luther would go to these kings and princes, like Calvin went to these kings and princes, and Zwingli was hated by everybody, so no one didn't like him, and they all just killed them all. But like I realized that the very earliest Protestants really had to kind of just were selling their Christianity to like to the state, and that for me was the kind of the first thing. Like, well, that doesn't kind of seem right. And so I remember I was Googling, do evangelicals become Catholic, thinking this would never happen, right? And I get this list of guys called like Scott Hahn, like Thomas Howard, Steve Ray, John Bergsma, and then I began to read from these authors. And I was like you say, I was not throwing up on a bucket. That's good. But I was sneaking like in the middle of the night. Like I was up till like 3 a.m. Well, before we had kids, reading books, watching lectures on YouTube, watching like these debates you talk about, right? Realizing, wait a minute, there's this whole world that I had no idea. And I love, again, that's a fantastic analogy, is that car wreck that you are curious about as you pass by. And gosh, we can't hardly look, right? We want to look and see what's going on there, right? But you don't want to look because you don't want to see the car accident. That's the same thing for the church fathers or church history or these kind of Catholic kind of arguments or ideas, right? You, especially when you're steeped as you were so intensely in anti-Catholicism, you don't want to know. You don't want to, right? You don't want to know what you don't know.
Ignorance is bliss at that point.
Yes. Wow. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. It's not everybody has that experience of like I was throwing up. It sounds very dramatic. And I remember, I did a podcast on Catholic Truth, and Brian had said, do you think that was like demonic at all? Like, was there some demonic influence there? And the more I've thought about that since, yeah, I do. I think I was like, releasing something, that some sort of stronghold, because I liked what I was reading about the Eucharist. I thought, okay, this is beautiful. I can get behind a Eucharist. Like, I can do Eucharistic theology. But it was everything it was the priests. They're saying priests, and they're saying bishops, and they're saying Rome. And it was so troubling at the time, because I think I was getting rid of pride, so much pride, as I was reading through church history, and then realizing as I read the Reformers and the Protestant Reformation, just how glossed over and whitewashed that was for me as a Protestant. We celebrate them every year for Reformation Day, but when I was reading through some of the stuff, I'm like, these guys did not have it all together. And we are really building entire traditions off of one person's theology. Like, that is actually crazy if you just logically think about it. And so a lot of that stuff was just disgruntling. And it was starting to come out in church. I would go to my Baptist church, and I would be, again, unsatisfied. I would go talk to the pastor after church about, some of the things I was reading. And truly, I think one time I was actually told, like, don't even read the church fathers. Don't even worry about them. They're just men. They're fallible. We don't need to read them. And now looking back, it's like, why didn't you want me to read them? What was I going to find there? And so, but over time, reading through the church fathers, craving a Eucharistic theology, because I think once you truly understand the Eucharist, it's hard to not want that. Once you start to get a taste of the union you can have with Christ in that way, it's hard to not want that. I think you have to just get through the anti-Catholic rhetoric first and put that aside, and then really look at what the church teaches about the Eucharist, right? And so I started wanting that. And so we kind of church hopped with Anglicanism and Lutheranism, where we could get some sort of higher church view. But even there, it wasn't satisfying. And so it was like one day my husband sat me down and said, I have to be reunited with the Catholic faith, because he had been kind of out of it for a while. And I kind of just trusted the Lord with that. Okay. Like, my husband is leading our family. My husband is the head of our household. He is sure that he needs to be a Catholic again and go back home to Rome, I would say. And so what if I just followed his lead and saw what happened? And then once I did, and I actually started like catechesis and reading the catechism, because newsflash, I wasn't before. I wasn't actually reading it. I wasn't actually trying to understand what Catholics believed. It started to, again, go from obstacles to just beautiful. I often call Catholicism a treasure chest. And I'm just constantly like finding new gems that it's just like I can't get enough. So it's radical. It really is. The change is radical, but I'm so happy that it happened.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, it's fascinating with these kind of conversions when you were so anti-Catholic, trying to pull him and his family out of the church.
Yeah.
And it ends up backfiring on you. I love that it's just based on that one random quote too. Like, it's something
literally one little thing.
It's not even as if, I don't think, they were pushing back with these amazing arguments that convinced you.
No.
It was something different, which is interesting, right? Again, we don't know how the Lord works these things out, right?
Yeah. I think I tend to have a more analytical mind, and I think when I saw that, it was almost an invitation. It was like an invitation of like to be deep in history. Come and be deep in history.
Yeah.
And so it was almost like a challenge to me that was bothering me. Like, okay, well, and then it was like, well, now that I know that all of this vast church history exists, and I like history, so I'm like, why has nobody emphasized church history in my Protestant bubble? So yeah, it was almost like challenge accepted. I'm gonna look at church history and see what I find there, and here I am. So
and I love that he, you kind of pulled him out, but but then he's like, you know what, I gotta go back, right? And then you're at a point where you're like, you know what, yeah, okay, like you've made that journey far long enough to be like, yeah, okay, this makes sense. Like that's fascinating in and of itself. I think of so many listeners, viewers to this show where, like, you know, one spouse converts and they have no idea how they'll ever get their spouse to convert, and there's pain, there's agony, there's suffering for years and years and years. I can think of brilliant scholars on this show they're fantastic theologians who they're waiting for their spouse to convert still, and it's like. It's like, what else can I do? I have here all the arguments. Here's all the reasons why. I can tell you every quotation this comes from, and the source, and yet, you know, those closest to the action are still remain not Catholic. So, I think stories like yours are amazing to share. Where here's an example of the Lord working in a way that worked out in a pretty incredible story. And there's hope for everyone, these kind of stories, right? You have to imagine that even despite all that anti-Catholicism, right? The Lord is at work, and he has his timelines. He has his reasons for things taking longer or shorter.
Yes.
He knows what he's doing. And I think somebody who's truly pursuing their faith, who's really genuinely trying to go deeper in their love for Jesus and right, and practice their Christian faith, they're going to get there eventually, right? Because they're seeking that, and if you seek, it's going to be given to you.
Yeah,
right.
Something came to mind that as you were talking, I think if people, I don't just want to say Protestants, because any denomination or religious background, but I think if people can just adopt an overall disposition to be open to truth, and I think our culture is shifting, at least in the US. I know you're in Canada, but we're kind of, there's this shift from subjectivity to objectivity that I think a lot of people reach at some point, where it's no longer appealing to shop around and find your flavor. I think at some point, if you're honest with yourself, you realize that's the end of that is chaos.
Yeah.
And when you really sit and think about that, that is bothersome. Truth is not just this thing that we willy-nilly go shopping for and land on what suits us. Like, that's crazy. Do we say that about other topics? No, right? Like science. We don't just say, oh, whatever you feel is right with science is scientifically true. Absolutely not. Why do we do this with religion? And I think a lot of people are, because there is a huge wave of Catholic conversions right now. There was just I don't remember the exact platform, but it was an evangelical platform that put an article out about, like, oh my gosh, what's happening? But I think people are hungering for objectivity and what is true. And they're getting tired of this, just trying to do it themselves. Like, how tiring. I was getting so burnt out trying to decipher what the scriptures meant. I was getting so tired of church hopping. I didn't want to do that anymore. And I think people don't really find satisfaction in that. And so that's what leads a lot of people, I think, to the Catholic faith, because you have this infallible magisterium that has done this work for you. The Holy Spirit has guided the church for years, centuries, to be able to teach what is true and good. Why are we so against that?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
That's very well
Tangent,
said.
rabbit hole.
Yeah, no, I can think of, and this touches on the authority issue, the idea of the magisterium and that teaching that comes from Jesus and the apostles. I can think of bringing this to my pastor, my non-denominational church where my wife and I were last before we converted.
Yeah.
And I brought this to him and I said, look, in Matthew, Jesus tells us how to solve debates with our other brothers, right? He tells us, you bring somebody else. If they don't agree, you bring somebody else. If they don't agree, bring it to the church, and the church can resolve this dispute. And if the brother doesn't agree with the church, then they're out of the church, right? They have to be re-evangelized. They're a tax collector. They're a sinner. Like they're back out and have to be re-catechized and re-evangelized to be brought back in, okay?
Yep.
There's a clear framework there. And I said to him, look, in our non-denominational church, how does this work? Like, how do we, because if somebody disagrees with what we teach in this church, you can't tell them they're out, because they'll go to the church down here and they'll still be Christian, but in a different Christian church. Like,
Exactly.
how can we apply the teachings of Jesus that are clear in the Bible? And his answer was, I'll never forget, like, he's a great guy. I love him. He's a family friend for years and years. Fantastic, awesome pastor, wonderful guy. But his response was kind of like this, to kind of shift the question aside and kind of say, well, I don't know, but it's not that important, right? We can still be a church. And I went like, but that's the mechanism that Christ gives us to resolve disputes. And this is why there's so many denominations that can't agree, because we can't follow that mechanism. And sure enough, like, this was a church that was solidly Christian, evangelical, wonderful church. But sure enough, years later, after we left, that this church had a split and imploded over issues that were divisive in the Bible, like same-sex issues, gender issues. These things divided that church, leadership issues, and the church collapsed and kind of scattered. Here was a church that I thought would be around forever. It was a fantastic church, great pastor, great leadership team, and they succumbed to this problem that I saw back then and said, hey, how do we solve this? They didn't know. And then they experienced that problem, right? So there is this like yearning for, like you said, the magisterium, this authority, this teaching office that can decide what is objectively true versus what I think the Bible says on these things, right? There's such a, and it sounds kind of weird to say, but like that idea of authority and being under the authority of something that can trace itself back to the apostles and teaches with that authority, like that is a beautifully freeing thing from how we used to do Christianity, right?
Oh my gosh, it's so freeing. But I have to respect the fact that a lot of people on the other side don't see that yet. Again, obstacles. These are obstacles. And because I'll hear it said, oh, people just convert to Rome because they finally, it's just an easier solution. They don't have to do any thinking for themselves. They just kind of, I think it was in a Mike Winger talk. He had said that. He said,
it would be.
He said they're, Catholics are just, they don't want to do that heavy thinking and thinking about the Bible and whatever. They want to just be able to take the overthinking out of it and trust what Rome says or whatever. And they almost say that like it's a slight, but it's like, I look at it more from an angle of why would Christ leave his church in such disarray to, have no interpreter, no infallible interpreter for his teaching and for his word, because it's just a matter of fact. You can read the same verse with 10 different people and come away with different interpretations. Why on earth why was he so able to do all of these crazy, amazing, miraculous things, but he's not capable of leaving some order in his church to teach us aright? And for me, that was enough. I get for some people that's not enough and they need more, but I just think the issue of authority, it not only makes sense logically, it is biblical, and I think it is the best image of Christ and his church, what he would want for us.
Yes, and it is biblical, right? That's so important. I mean, I would encounter, right, Christ giving his apostles this authority, giving Peter a particular authority, and kind of go, like, those are the verses we never saw, right? Those are the verses that we'd read them,
like but skim over.
We'd miss them, right? And then when you begin to try and read that anew, right, you'd go, well, what's Christ doing here if not giving them authority that passes on, especially when you see the Jewish context and how the Jewish reader would have understood that very, very clearly as this kind of priesthood authority, right? I think even the earliest interpreters, like the earliest Christians who wrote about like the priesthood and the bishopric and like the diaconate would say, look, these are Old Testament offices that Jesus didn't abolish. He just restored and gave this anew to this new kingdom he's establishing on earth, right? And it's deeply biblical, right? It's a understanding that you could do a deep Bible study on that and pull that all out of Scripture. It was right there. We never saw it, right? But it's deeply biblical.
Absolutely. I just got the New Catholic Study Bible, the Old Testament and New Testament. And it's just been such a treasure. But it's like once you are again enlightened by the church and you you convert. Because I remember one thing my priest told me before I converted. He was like, you don't have to have all the answers to convert.
Yeah.
You can trust, convert, and then it comes to you as you know, and that's so true. Because now I'm reading through the Bible again, and it's like, how did I miss this? How did I miss that?
Yes, yes.
And it really does come to light. So yeah, it's deeply biblical. I would argue that all day. I know some people disagree, but I do think that every single thing that I've learned, at least as a Catholic, can be deduced by the Bible for sure.
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm. You talked about the idea of sometimes requires a miraculous intervention, right? That you think of like St. Paul, right? Or the conversion from an anti-Catholic or an anti-something, right, to this new thing sometimes requires this miraculous kind of conversion. And I can think of what I always come back to is Dr. Peter Kraft, again, a Catholic convert, brilliant theologian. His challenge always is, okay, if you are anti-Catholic, if you are skeptical, if you are anywhere on that spectrum, go to adoration.
Just once.
He always said, go to a church that has Jesus in the host, consecrated host, on the altar, in a monstrance, and just go. Yeah. And just see what that, and I always think of that because I can remember my first experience as when I learned about what Catholics believed, right, about the Eucharist.
Yeah.
I realized that Catholics believe that Jesus actually is their body, blood, soul, divinity in that consecrated host. We can't see him, but he is there in all other sense and purposes, right? And I remember understanding that and being completely floored, and then I couldn't wait to find a local church that offered adoration because I was like so stoked to go and experience that.
Yes.
And I could as a non-Catholic. I didn't have to. It wasn't receiving the Eucharist, which is different and even more mind-blowing. But I can remember like the prevailing sense of like insane peace that really was otherworldly. It really was miraculous that I could not explain.
Right.
Entering into that church, seeing Jesus in the monstrance on the altar, understanding that was what the church had believed was happening there since the beginning of the church, right? He's mentioned the early church fathers. The earliest church fathers articulated this idea of the real presence at the very beginning. And here it was like that. I can understand why that's Dr. Kreef's like challenge.
Yeah.
Because you experience that. And if Christ really is there, you got to think he's going to move you in a sense, right?
I do think so because it was really the linchpin of my conversion was the Eucharist. I will say, before authority, before all of that. But I would challenge people to do that. Go to a Catholic mass. If you have hesitations about Catholicism, at least read the Catechism. Because I'm willing to bet just in my everyday dialogue with different Protestants, a lot of these people who are against the Catholic faith are not reading the Catechism, are not going to a Catholic mass, are not just trying to understand it from the Catholic side authentically. Yes. They're talking about what Catholics believe, but they don't actually know what Catholics believe. So I would challenge anybody who is open to this to go to mass one time, sit in the back, and just absorb it. Bring your Bible if you need to, but I think you're going to notice it's all there. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
Yes, I can't tell you the number of. I think there's probably about a dozen videos I made in response to Mike Winger that never were released. I made them.
You got to release them.
Up, and they're somewhere on my hard drive that simply said, "Mike, read the Catechism."
Yeah, I know that would really help him.
Yeah. But you're right. So many of and it's so simple, right? It's so simple. I mean, that for such a long time has been my go-to kind of response to any kind of anti-Catholic idea. I'm like, hey, look at that up in the Catechism. See what Catholics actually believe before you criticize that, because I think you'll find, and maybe you'll find that you were right and you're justified in that what you're saying, right? But at least read what the Catechism says, because it's such a rich place to go to that outlines all of Catholic teaching with quotes from the fathers and the Bible of all places. Like the number of times they quote scripture, right? And every single page is thousands and thousands of times. But just read that Catechism to see what you are protesting against, right? It's a simple thing to do, I think, but there's that pride thing, I think, in many cases, right?
They don't want to see. I think they're afraid of what they'll see.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was there, right? I get it. Mm-hmm. But there's that. I wonder, maybe a left turn, but like there's this sense of there are apologists out there doing the work of saying, okay, I'm a Baptist pastor. I've read the church fathers, and I can still be a Baptist pastor, right? Guys like
Gavin
Gavin
Ortland.
Ortland, yeah, right? Like
Yeah.
who do really good, serious work.
Yeah.
That dig deeply in the church fathers that say, hey, you know what, Sophia, you don't have to convert.
Yeah.
Like here are church fathers that speak against this or against this, that weren't Catholic, that believed this. And I know a lot of people who personally who wrestle with these things and hear those things and wrestle with those things deeper.
Yeah.
Right? Many of them become Catholic anyway.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Right? But where were you in that kind of stuff? Like, was there a sense of you could hold on for a bit in listening to those arguments before you succumb to the tide of Catholicism?
Yeah, I would hold on for dear life for sure. Gavin Ortland was kind of my saving grace a lot of times. I'll just watch Gavin Ortland and it'll be fine. But even there, I wasn't satisfied, unfortunately, because some of the stuff he would read, I'm like, well, that's very Catholic, but he would just like skim over it. And so I would try to hang on for dear life a lot of times. But it was at the end of the day when I was honest with myself and in the quiet, that God's voice was there, and it was saying, he was definitely saying, keep going.
Yeah.
And so I'm really glad that I did.
Yeah, I've talked to some of these fantastic, and I can't remember the many conversations over the last number of years, but a couple guys I have in mind who were these converts who were also incredible biblical scholars, right? Who were PhD kind of early church history guys who converted and would say, okay, so you'll hear arguments made by people who will say, well, yeah, there are some church fathers who don't believe baptism or who didn't believe the Eucharist or these things. You can find these outliers. And this one guy that I had on the show said, actually, you can, but they're wrong. People will tell you that they're wrong. They misunderstand those church fathers. Mm-hmm. So not that just you can find, because there's one argument that says, okay, yeah, there are outliers, but they're outliers, right?
Yeah.
If the majority of church fathers believe, this on X or Y or Z, you go with the majority, not with the one outlier guy.
Right.
But in this case, the guy said, no, those outliers actually, the people who are saying they're outliers, they're wrong. They all believe this, right?
Wow.
So there wasn't even a minority consensus on a different side, right? But in either case, like those, right, the church fathers have been that catalyst for so many conversions, right? Because on those issues, right, on baptism, on the Eucharist, on the threefold ministry of bishop, priest, and deacon, on the saints, on so many of these topics, right, on relics.
Yeah.
The church fathers are unanimous in what they believe, and it's so counter to what we would be practicing like in our churches, right? And those anti-Catholic arguments, those kind of pushbacks, were so bereft of actual depth to answer like the clear witness of history, right?
Yes. Yes. And when I think, again, a big part of because these conversations, they're going to make people uncomfortable. I mean, it's just when you start to read church history, when you start to listen to different debates, it's uncomfortable at first, because I think what you start to realize once you're exposed to church history, once you're exposed to the church fathers, at least if you're in the evangelical world, there is really not a shred of anything that looks like the evangelical worship service. And that, for me, some people, I've talked to people who are okay with that. I've talked to people who don't see an issue with that, and worship can develop over time and change and whatever. But I really had a serious issue with that. What I'm doing every Sunday is so radically, not just a little, but radically different from how the church has worshiped for 2,000 years plus. It was that outlier thing. I am such an outlier right now in the context of the entirety of Christian history. What makes that okay? And I think it's good to feel uncomfortable by that, because it should spark some curiosity. But yeah, that the outlier thing was a really good thing you brought up, because I think that's with the whole Reformation. New thoughts after 2,000 years, or, well, not really, but new thoughts coming up that have never been in the church before. And it's one person, and then all these crowds follow and turns into a whole denomination. Now there's thousands and thousands, but
Yeah, one of the first things that I did years before I converted to Catholicism was to investigate the origins of my Sunday morning worship service as a
Yep.
Protestant, right? And compare that to historical worship services. And I realized then that I had no leg to stand on. I was like,
Yeah.
well, this isn't historic at all. Like an evangelical service, even less so, right? And it was catalyst because we began to meet in a church building that we shared with a Lutheran congregation.
Okay.
So we had our Sunday morning worship service and then they had theirs. And after we cleared out, they took down our big like banners and took down our stuff and they had an altar. And they had a priest who wore a clerical collar.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they had this red candle that burned above this thing that looked like a box they called like the tabernacle. This was quite a high Lutheran like,
Yeah,
church,
wow.
right? But those things were like, well, why are they doing that stuff? Like, we're doing this. It's so different. So I began to look at it and I realized that, wait a minute, they're doing something that's much more historic.
Yep.
We're doing the new thing that was invented like 50, even less than that many
Yeah.
years ago, right? In the kind of Pentecostal revival movement, what we were doing, it was shocking, right? And for me, the huge kind of shift in mentality is the idea of worship, right? And the idea that, and this for me really developed over the last decade of being a Catholic. I didn't understand it very clearly right away. I got the bones of it, but it's such a difference between what we called worship as
Right.
as Protestants, right? Which was the singing to God, the praying, right? And then listening to a sermon, which wasn't really technically worship,
Yeah.
but it was that kind of that education, that discipleship part of it. But then you look at a Catholic Mass and there's this thing called worship that entails sacrifice, right? That entails the representation of Christ on the cross at the Last Supper.
Yep.
The priest is, right, bringing us back to the foot of the cross there, right? And representing that sacrifice on the cross, to the Father of Christ.
Yeah.
Like that, the centrality of worship was actually a kind of sacrifice, and that was what not only Christians did since the beginning. We see in the church fathers. That's what God gave to the Jewish, the Jewish nation first too.
Yeah.
That's how He's always wanted to be worshipped, is through a kind of sacrifice.
Yes.
And that just exploded my brain and unlocked this whole other
Whoa,
idea of
what?
like
Yeah.
how fundamentally different like Catholicism and Protestant Christianity was, at least what I was doing as an evangelical. Like that was night and day. And one was historic worship, and one was this other new like very, very new thing we call worship, right? That was the hook, line, and sinker for me, I guess, right?
I think what I came to realize, like you, was what I'm doing is I'm praising and I'm talking about God on Sunday. But yeah, then once you learn, like, I don't think it takes reading the church fathers. I think you read your Bible and realize that worship is so intricately related to sacrifice. You really can't have one without the other.
Yeah.
Then it becomes almost this feeling of like, oh my goodness, I don't have sacrifice like at all in my worship. And that's a serious problem. And then, obviously you can, because I think you can just, as you're starting to read through this stuff as a Protestant, you start to kind of deduce like, well, I can't be this, I can't be this, I can't be this. As you start crossing, that's at least what I did. Okay, I can cross off being a Baptist. That's clearly the least historical. I can cross off being non-denominational, which often are just Baptists. I can cross off being, this and that, because at least now I'm down to like Lutheran, Anglican, maybe Presbyterian. But then you still have the same problems there because there's still things missing, serious things missing. There's a serious lack of Eucharistic theology that you just don't find until you're home in the Catholic Church. And it all makes sense once you're there. I often say, when me and my best friends lived down the street, they're actually converts from Reformed Baptist faith. So we have these conversations all the time. And we were talking about how I think a lot of Protestants are searching, with the altar calls and with this emotionalism.
Yes.
I think they're searching for the Eucharist, but they don't know it.
Yeah.
they're craving a type of intimacy with Christ that they're not getting because they're having this emotionalism every single Sunday. Because at the end of the day, that is at least for me what it was. It was being emotional about my faith. And they're having to kind of reignite that emotionalism each time to go to the altar, to give their lives to Christ again and again and again. And they're looking for that intimacy. It's like, and then you become Catholic and it's like, oh, I can have this intimacy at all times in the Eucharist. And it doesn't have to be this thing I have to like go and search out every week. Yeah. It's just here for me to receive simply in the sacrament. Yeah. So tangenting again, but just beautiful.
That's fantastic. And here's the altar. Like as a Pentecostal, we like the height of our kind of worship was the altar call, right?
Yeah.
You could praise God and sing these songs, but if you really wanted to get deep into it, right, you'd come down to the altar, which meant the front of the church, which made no sense at all because there's no altar there, right?
Yes.
But we innately knew that we patterned our worship on the Old Testament where the altar, we weren't thinking of the Catholic altar.
Right.
We were thinking of the Old Testament altar where sacrifices were made, where Abraham gave Isaac, right?
Yeah.
As a sacrifice. Yeah. We were thinking of that, not realizing, many of us in the room, I had no clue, that there actually was a church that actually had an altar that still did this thing for real. What they were sacrificing wasn't the Old Testament stuff. It was Jesus who gave himself to be there, represented, like, right, drawing us in every single mass around the whole entire world. Like, I think if we could have properly understood that, right, if somebody just paused that worship on a Sunday and said, wait a minute, guys, listen to this. Yeah, I think you'd have most of the room become Catholic on mass, right? No pun intended, but because like they were looking for that. Y'all are seeking this. Here's where it is.
Yeah.
Like that's mind blowing, right?
Yep. Yes. And I think in the very fabric of Protestantism is woven in anti-Catholicism, whether you realize it or not. And I think that really blurs the lines for people. I think if they could just get rid of that, if that could just be weeded out and people could just learn Catholicism for what it truly is and what it teaches, I think we would see so many more converts, and I'm happy we are seeing a lot more lately. Because I think, again, as I said, people are getting tired of this subjectivity with truth, and they're craving, I think, something more substantial. And people are wanting to, I know myself at least, I want to be thinking with the church. I'm tired of being this outlier. I want to be with the church that has existed from the beginning. So it's a great place to be. Yeah.
That's so well said. That's a perfect bow on top of the story. Sophia, this is a fantastic conversation. I'm very grateful for you spending your time here with us today.
Thank you so much.
I want to give you a chance to point listeners, viewers towards your stuff, because I know you're launching or have launched it. You're in the beginnings of launching some stuff for people. You were obviously, I'm going to commend you because you were obviously amazing at this. This has been fantastic.
Thanks.
So where can listeners, viewers go to find and follow you? Where do you want to point them towards?
So it's not really like big yet. I have an intro video, but it's I've named it The Catholic Chronicles. And so it'll be on YouTube primarily, but I'm thinking about branching off and doing some sort of podcast. But Catholic Chronicles, Sophia Nikolai, search my name. But hopefully there I'll be kind of just this conversation, but in different ways and tidbits and fleshing out my thoughts a little bit. So that's what I want to do. I've felt called to it in some capacity for a while. I just haven't really taken the bait yet. So I did, and we'll see what happens. So,
That's fantastic. So viewers, listeners, your mission is to blow that channel up. We'll put links in the show notes. Please head over that way. That's amazing. Sophia, thank you for your time. I want to say God bless you. The work you are doing for the church, it's amazing. And thank you for spending time with us today. This was really a pleasure.
Yes, you too, Keith. Thank you so much for your channel. It's such a blessing.
Thank you.
Yes.